What you're looking at here is a document that I've set up beforehand. I'm not going to go into detail about how I set it up, since that material is covered in previous tutorials. If you don't understand how to do tempo markings with enclosures or how to set up your measure numbers, go back to previous videos and check those out. In this video, what I want to do is dive straight into drum set notation. So let's get to talking about layers in Finale. If you go down to the bottom left-hand corner here, you can click and choose which layer you want to notate in. Now, you don't have to click, you can also use the hotkey. The hotkey is Command Option 1 for layer 1, Command Option 2 for layer 2, Command Option 3 for 3, Command Option 4 for 4. We're primarily going to deal with layer 1 and layer 2. Layer 1 is almost always going to be stems up, and layer 2 is almost always going to be stems down. We're going to use layer 2 to notate for the feet. We're going to use layer 1 to notate for our hi-hats. Where we put the snare, that's kind of up to you. That's an artistic decision. We'll talk about it in a minute. But to get started, let's just begin entering in a drum beat using the simple entry tool. Now, instead of using the MIDI keyboard, I suggest using the computer keyboard to start entering in drum set music. I find it much faster than if you were to use a MIDI keyboard simply because it's a little bit faster to use the up and down arrows plus the number pad. So I'm going to go ahead and start entering in my drum set pattern here. And this is just going to be the top layer, which is layer 1. Now what you can see here is I want to have an open hi-hat on the and of 4 in measure 2. But the player doesn't know this should be an open hi-hat. So I'm going to go to my articulation tool, click above this note, and I'm going to go to this little O to tell the player that it should be an open hi-hat. Likewise, I want the player to know to start with a closed hi-hat. So in the first measure on the first note, I'm going to click here and go down to this plus to make sure the player knows to start on a closed hi-hat. Now what I want to do is switch to layer 2. So I've switched here to layer 2 using hotkeys. And now I'm going to start notating my kick and my snare drum. Now you'll notice that I'm notating the snare drum on layer 2. I'm going to do that in measure 1, and then just for demonstrative purposes, I'm going to notate the snare drum on layer 1 in measure 2. Ultimately, I'll change this, but I just want to explain something really quickly. So there's an advantage to the way it's notated in measure 2, and then there's also an advantage to the way it's notated in measure 1. And when I say it, I refer to the snare drum, of course. So in measure 2, the advantage is that it stems up, so it's pretty clear that it's being played with the hands. So that's a great thing about this notational method. There's one drawback though. If I were to put an accent here, then what this would tell the player is to accent both the hi-hat and the snare drum. If you want independent accents, you would notate it the way I did it in measure 1. This way, the snare drum can be accented, but the hi-hat doesn't necessarily have to. So I prefer the notational method that I've used in measure 1, but either is good, and either is something that a drum set player will be familiar with and most likely comfortable with. So let me go ahead and make this look the way that I want it to look, which is the technique I've used in measure 1. Stay tuned for the next video where we will dive into the percussion layout designer.